Okay, let's get into this. The Russia-Ukraine war, it's now entered its third year. And, as we're looking past 2025, the big question everyone has is just what's next?
Hmm.
I'm really keen to see how the analysis you've put together helps you, the listener, sort of understand the sheer complexity here for Europe, for the world, and, well, for the conflict itself.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we've essentially synthesized insights from a really detailed analysis. It's drawn mainly from a YouTube script called Russia-Ukraine War, What's Next After 2025.
Hmm.
Our goal really is to pull out the most crucial points, give you a clear sense of, well, are we looking at a never-ending stalemate? Or maybe some dramatic global shift? Or, something else entirely.
A shortcut to getting informed, basically.
Exactly. A shortcut to being properly informed on what is undeniably a pivotal global issue right now.
Okay, so let's start with where things stand right now. We've seen these huge offensives, haven't we? From both sides, Ukraine and Russia. But no decisive victory for either. It really feels like things are kind of sliding into what some are calling a frozen war. What does that actually mean, and how does it, stack up against something like, say, North and South Korea?
Yeah, it's a compelling parallel people are drawing. What military analysts are increasingly saying is that the front lines, they might just stay locked
Mm.
for years potentially, unless, some significant external pressure forces a real change. And what's fascinating here is this idea of a long-term static conflict. It's not just a pause.
Right.
A frozen war means major fighting might die down, but the core issues, the political disputes, the territory, they stay unresolved indefinitely.
Like Korea.
Exactly like the Korean Peninsula, no peace treaty, just an armistice. It keeps this state of, well, permanent tension even without the large-scale battles.
Yeah.
And that has huge implications strategy-wise, resources, even just for society in both countries.
Okay, so that static picture on the ground leads us to, I guess, the Western support question. Billions have been poured in. US, UK, EU, huge sums. But now, heading deeper into 2025, you can sort of feel the stress on that support, can't you? What's driving that, especially with elections coming up?
Yeah, the sustainability is definitely a major question.
Yeah.
The analysis really points to upcoming elections across the West as a huge factor. You've got voters, right, dealing with their own economic problems, inflation and such, and they're starting to really question, the sheer scale of continued spending on Ukraine.
Understandable from their perspective.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And this public mood puts, immense pressure on politicians, which leads to some calls from some places for Ukraine to maybe think about negotiations.
But Kiev's position on that seems rock solid, doesn't it? No giving up land to Russia.
Absolutely firm, no concessions. And that, well, that creates a really difficult dynamic, a real paradox.
How so?
Well, you have Western allies feeling this internal push to maybe cut back aid, nudge towards talks, while Ukraine is completely steadfast. No trading territory for peace. It's a fundamental disagreement.
Yeah.
And it's a major block to any immediate peace initiatives. And it directly impacts how long this level of support can actually last.
So while the West grapples with that, we should also look inside Russia. We hear about sanctions all the time, but how is that and other factors really playing out? Is there growing internal turmoil for Putin?
It's revealing, definitely. The sanctions, they do continue to bite, no doubt. But the analysis points to specific internal groups becoming, let's say, louder. You're seeing more public dissent from families of soldiers who've died. They want answers, accountability. Veterans, too, some are expressing frustration about how the war is being run.
And opposition voices.
Even those, though heavily suppressed, they're finding ways to signal discontent. Now, does this create mounting pressure on Putin? Yes, especially with Russian elections supposedly coming in 2026.
But no sign of him backing down.
The analysis is pretty clear on that. We shouldn't expect him to suddenly change his core goals because of this internal pressure. Not yet, anyway. Feels more like a slow burn rather than an immediate crisis for his leadership.
Okay, and hanging over absolutely everything is this constant, really serious risk of escalation. The potential for NATO and Russia to clash directly, that's still very real, right?
Very real. And dangerously unpredictable. The analysis highlights that just one mistake, think about a stray missile accidentally hitting NATO soil, or a misjudged airspace incident, could trigger Article 5.
Article 5, the Collective Defense Clause. An attack on one is an attack on all.
Exactly. And that could just instantly drag the world into a much, much bigger war. Now, the U.S. and its allies, they're boosting deterrence, trying to prevent that exact scenario.
But the risk remains.
Oh, absolutely. The sheer closeness of forces, the intensity, it just makes the whole situation incredibly volatile. Dangerously so.
So, given all this tension, these really dug-in positions, what does that mean for peace talks? It sounds like, well, they're not really on the horizon right now.
Distant prospect is probably the right way to put it. The core disagreements are they're stark. And right now they look irreconcilable.
Ukraine wants all its land back?
Unequivocally, full return of all occupied territories. Meanwhile, Russia seems just as determined to hold what it's taken, maybe even angle for more.
So, no middle ground.
Not easily visible, no. Without some kind of major political shift inside Russia or Ukraine, or maybe some incredibly effective third-party mediation, which hasn't really emerged yet, genuine peace seems, a distant dream.
Okay, but despite all that, the lack of a clear peace path, Ukraine is actually looking ahead, thinking about post-war recovery. What does that future look like, and what sort of time frame are we realistically talking about?
Well, the scale of the recovery needed is just immense. It could easily take a decade, maybe more. That's the
A
assessment.
decade, wow.
Yeah. And what's interesting, the analysis notes that Western companies, they're already kind of positioning themselves, preparing for contracts in the huge rebuilding effort that will eventually be needed.
Planning ahead.
Definitely. But it's not just about bricks and mortar or infrastructure. The analysis also mentions this expert belief that Ukraine could potentially become an EU member by 2027.
What?
If, and it's a big if the security situation improves significantly. So it's about more than just economic recovery. It's about Ukraine's whole integration into the wider European community. So look, as we wrap this up, the core possibilities that come out of the analysis are pretty stark, aren't they? We're potentially looking at a long, drawn-out frozen conflict. Or there's the terrifying possibility of a sudden dangerous escalation drawing more players in. Or maybe, just maybe, against the odds, some kind of unforeseen breakthrough towards peace.
Yeah.
But what's absolutely clear, I think, from all the sources we looked at, is that the world just cannot afford to ignore what's happening in Eastern Europe anymore. It's too consequential.
Right. And for you listening, here's maybe a final thought to chew on. Regardless of whether this conflict stays frozen or escalates or even finds some kind of peace deal, how might its trajectory fundamentally reshape the global balance of power? And what does it mean for the future of democracy? That's something worth exploring further, long after this deep dive ends.